Fable, one of the most highly anticipated Xbox games yet, is the latest game from designer Peter Molyneux, whose last game, Black and White, also let you make decisions as to whether to be good or be evil, and see how those decisions would manifest themselves literally within the game world. In this particular game, you get to play as a hero. You start out as a young kid and eventually become sort of a seasoned veteran and get to live your life either by doing good for the good of the people or by basically taking everything that you want, dominating over the land and things like that. It's an intriguing premise and one that Fable actually handles quite capably, though some of the most interesting aspects of the game turn out to be fairly superficial, more like novelties than like actual gameplay elements. Nevertheless, at the core of Fable, there's a very solid action-adventure game that, all other things being equal, is very enjoyable to play. Fable does have an overarching storyline, and this storyline actually doesn't change much depending on whether you're being good or being evil. That's actually kind of a disappointment because you might be expecting for dramatic shifts to occur depending on how you're playing. There is an ultimate decision that you get to make. Your morality does ultimately affect the outcome of the game. But still, the truth is you could see most of what Fable has to offer playing it through once and continuing to play it even after you've finished the main storyline, which you can do. The game's main story is actually pretty short. You can finish it in less than 10 hours if you just focus on going from one story mission to the next. However, there are plenty of side quests to take, and also the world of the game in general is very detailed, so you'll find demon doors that ask you different riddles to open them and find the treasures hidden within, or you can search for these hidden silver keys to unlock the magic treasures and all kinds of things like that, or just mess around with the townspeople, try to get hitched. You can get married in this game, or you could buy certain houses and rent them out. There's all kinds of weird little things like that that, again, in and of themselves aren't very deep, but there are plenty of them, and they're all pretty interesting in their own right. So it's just fun to play Fable as though it's this big sandbox. It's this big fantasy game where you can run around, do whatever you want in pretty much whatever order, and see the results of that. So even though the world of the game appears very imaginative, this game looks great, sounds wonderful and everything, has some very interesting looking characters and creatures, you really have to bring your own imagination to bear to get the most out of this game. One of the most interesting things about the game is how your character actually transforms as you play the game and as you act good or act evil. You'll see him, if you're acting evil, gradually grow horns and start to walk with a hunch and actually gain like sort of a swarm of flies surrounding him. So he'll truly look very, very sinister if all you do is commit bad deeds. On the other hand, if you're very good and act like an angel, sure enough, you'll see sort of a divine aura surrounding your character, and all the villagers will love you and things like that. It's possible to totally reverse your alignment if you go and sort of pay penance at the temple of either the good or the evil god, and this is sort of a cheap way out, actually. It's sort of disappointing that you could just completely reverse your character's moral alignment if you just pay enough money. But still, it contributes to the game's sort of sandbox feel. As you carry on your adult life as a hero, you'll start to spot some of Fable's more interesting elements, such as the way in which villagers react to you differently, depending on such things as the clothes you're wearing, whether you're morally good or morally evil, whether you're famous or not. You'll see them perhaps flee in abject terror of you or run around and applaud you if they're really happy to see you. These types of things are really cool, and you'll also sometimes hear characters refer to you by your title. For instance, you might choose a title like Ranger or Chicken Chaser or Maleficus or something like that, and you'll hear villagers saying, "Oh, it's Maleficus!"
Maleficus! Go for it! Come on!
These types of moments are when Fable is at its best. It's giving you feedback about how you've been playing the game. It's all happening pretty subtly beneath the surface. But as you try to kind of dig deeper, you'll find that a lot of this stuff really is kind of a novelty, though a good one, but it really is superficial. So when you try to go into town and speak to various townspeople, there isn't too much you could do. You can kind of flip them off or try to scare them or just try to wave hello and see how they respond, and many of the responses will be amusing, but don't expect to carry on long, meaningful conversations or to really gain much of an affinity for most of the characters in the game. The game controls well and has a good solid feel to it. Regardless of whether you're fighting enemies toe-to-toe, using your bow, or blasting foes with magic, there's a pretty intuitive system that you're taught early on during the context of your character's childhood, so you'll pick up on the controls pretty quickly and then be able to stomp around the world of Albion. As you solve quests and defeat foes, you gain experience points with which you can level up your character. Although the melee combat, the archery, and the magic are all pretty simple, there's still a lot of room to develop your character, or rather to develop the order in which he gains skills. Though you might be thinking about going into Fable, trying to specialize maybe just as a sword fighter or as a magic user or something like that, the reality is you're probably going to pick skills from all three of the different sets and end up as some kind of hybrid. That's because as you spend experience points, it becomes a lot more costly to level up your character further in the same category. So you'll just end up taking a bit of each from all the different categories and eventually finding some sort of combination that makes your character extremely powerful. You'll be using magic to slow down time or become immensely strong for a temporary period and will just run around behind most of your foes and hack them to death. Actually, as a result of this, Fable really isn't a particularly challenging game. All you have to do is get past the initial learning curve and you'll see that most of the enemies really don't pose much of a fight. The game's technical merits are very significant indeed. The game looks outstanding. It just has a lot of detail and imagination in the environments especially and in the main character as well. It really doesn't cease being fun to kind of zoom in on your main character, check him out, see how he's maybe going gray or gaining some battle scars, or see how different hairstyles and things like that affect him. This is all very cool stuff, sort of virtual dollhouse type stuff that again plays into the whole notion that this is a choose-your-own-adventure type of game. It really is what you make it. The audio, meanwhile, is quite possibly the highlight of Fable. It's got this classical music score that is really the single most epic thing about the game. It really does a lot to create the fantasy feel, and likewise, there are just really good ambient noises, excellent voice acting. It all comes together quite well and does create sort of a cohesive feel for the world, even though as you're traveling around, there's some pretty frequent loading times as you travel from one small map to the next. The game doesn't feel seamless and sort of holistic. It doesn't feel like a big, huge world, but it's still very cool to explore around in. There are tons of little aspects to Fable. There are lots of little interesting things, like you could go to taverns and play bar games with the local residents and trade goods from one merchant to another and try to get the highest price, get married to maybe multiple people, all kinds of just weird little things like that you're actually liable to miss altogether if all you do is play through the main story mode. Fortunately, the main story mode is quite good, though it's not especially remarkable. Nevertheless, when you take everything as a whole in Fable, there really is a great game here with a lot of interesting things to see and do, a lot of genuine humor and creativity, and just a lot of real charm. So this is a game that you might not be playing for many, many weeks, but it's going to stick with you for a long time to come.